Hello and welcome to the fifth installment of my grading of all of the base game cards. If you want insight into the grading system, check out the description or click on the link in the top right hand corner to get to the first video of this series, where I explain it all. But let's get started. Biomass Combustors is a weird card. It's insanely cheap for 2 power prot and even lets you hit someone's plant prot for 1. I don't mind the negative point too much, as this card is clearly meant for development, and if it lets you play 1 or 2 strong power hungry cards, that's a good trade-off. The biggest problem of this card is its requirement. 6% oxygen can be Gen 5 or 6, and at that point, for what do you need the power? But sometimes oxygen races up fast, maybe if you're playing against Ecoline, and then this card is perfect. You get cheap power and hit the plant prot of the player who pushed oxygen like a maniac. Let's phrase it differently. In most cases, let's say 85% of the time, you see this card, it's not worth considering. But in the remaining 15% of the time, it is very good. And one last thing, if oxygen really raced up fast, and you're coincidentally swimming in steel at 6% oxygen, you can play this card plus Strip Mine for a surprise bonus bump steal against the plant prot player. But that's really niche. All in all, a D tier card in my opinion, but with the potential to be B tier in the right situation. How many times in the last gen, while calculating your plans for the optimal greenery conversions, did you think, but what if I get birds? That's right, the next card I'm going to be talking about is Birds, one of the 4 original 1-point animal cards, and in my opinion either the best or second best one. What makes 1-point animals so good in general? Well, on their own, they score on average 1 or 2 points, but can score more if the parameter they rely on races up the fastest. That's great value for their cost. Another reason for the potential of 1-point animals is that they have incredible synergy with various cards such as Large Convoy, Imported Nitrogen or Imported Hydrogen that let you place animals on different cards. With a 1-point animal down, Large Convoy can yield up to 7 points, which is just bonkers. And lastly, as I said earlier, the fact that you can hit someone's plant prot for 2 with this is just devastating. Of course, since Birds is only unlocked at 13% oxygen, it is not as great, since when oxygen is maxed out, each greenery will score 1 less point. Also, by then the game is nearly over, so there is less time to place greeneries in general. But even if it only prevents 1 last greenery, that's between 1 and 4 points. And all of that just for 10 MC. I would highly recommend picking up Birds in the draft, even in the early game. It's an A tier card, as it enables game-breakingly strong combos in some situations and is very strong in most other situations. When I started playing, I somewhat underestimated Black Polar Dust. If bought in the draft, it costs as much as the standard Project Aquifer, which doesn't sound great because other than letting you place an ocean, it just gives you 3 heat prot at the expense of 2 MC prot with no tag. So what redeems this card? Well, let me get this straight. Do not buy and play this card in the mid to late game. At that point, just use an SP if you really need an ocean. But Black Polar Dust can be really good early on if you try to go for a fast game, because it helps you push all 3 parameters. You get heat prot, an ocean, and can grab plants to help with the conversion. This could be a really strong card for Ecoline in the 2nd gen, for example, and it is a top tier card for Helion. But all in all, it still ranks quite low because there are just so many situations where it is absolutely useless, either because you're going for a long game or just because it is too late for the heat prot to matter. D tier card overall. Breathing Filters is one of the most straightforward point cards in the game. 2 points for 11 plus 3 is okay, and if you draw this card in the late game you will most likely play it. Its science tag certainly has some value, but mainly for Mazio or Olympus Mons combo potential, or for the super strong anti-grav. Its oxygen requirement often makes it useless for getting Quantum, Mass or AI Central down. On the base game board, this is one of the cards you really like to see in the last draft if Scientist was funded, since it helps with that, while simultaneously giving points. But in most scenarios, I'm not too pumped to see this. Obviously, if my opponents have any science combos going, I will have to cut this in the draft. It's a high C tier for me. There are a few situations in which Bribed Committee is an amazing card. Outside of these situations, it is sponsors but worse in every way. In the early game, this card gives okay development, especially if you're playing as Terrector, IC or Point Luna, and also when you have an early media group. It is also a cheap TR event, which can be really nice for UNMI. And lastly, it can be used in the race for Terraformer or Benefactor. Again, outside of these situations, it's just sponsors but worse. It has a higher potential than sponsors, but more often than not, it's a bit worse. Still, it goes in the same tier, C tier. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my ratings, or if not, how you would have rated them differently. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. And lastly, please check out my Twitch and my Twitter. See you in the next video.